Let's just start with our interview. And my first question to you, Matt, because obviously you've done so much in your career. So tell us about that. Tell us about your journey within the sports realm.
Okay, so within the sports business, my um, I guess my big break, if you like, happened when I was working after university. I worked in strategy consultancy, and I worked for a consultancy that worked on all sorts of problems. So how do you sell biscuits? How do you make lorries more efficient? All sorts of things, and made some luck for myself and found myself working in football on the acquisition of a Premier League football team at the time, and I just fell in love with it as a problem. It seemed to me that professional sports was had so much potential, but actually some of the way the businesses were run was fairly basic relative to some other sectors that I've worked in. And so I decided to try and dedicate my career to helping sporting organizations to become more professional and effective in the way in which they do the amazing things that they do. And from there, moved from that generic consultancy, moved to the NBA basketball league. So worked in marketing there for 4 years. Then worked at MTV, the music channel for 4, which was great learning. MTV looked to promote people quickly who, irrespective of age or experience, if they thought they had potential. So I did fairly well there, and ran a consultancy business in the sports and leadership space for 7 years. And then in 2011, almost exactly, in fact, 9 years and 364 days ago, co-founded a business called Two Circles, so a data digital analytics business, with a good friend of mine, Gareth Balch, who remains the chief executive of the business, Two Circles today, and my wife, Claire, who was the third part of our triangle, who set the business up. And over 9 years, now 10 years, the business has grown to 300 odd people, working right the way around the world, including in India. And it was an extraordinary journey. Just to go from our kitchen table to work for FIFA, the IOC, UEFA, the NBA, NFL, we had a fantastic journey. And when the business sold to Bruin Sports Capital, now Bruin Capital, a year ago, having done 9 years with my wife, it being the first thing we talked about in the morning and the last thing we talked about at night, we both decided it was time to take a step back and talk about something in the family other than Two Circles. So I stepped back from that a year ago, and my priority since then been trying to help the industry, but also writing a book which came out in July.
But that's amazing. But you're still involved with Two Circles, aren't you? Like you're going to be involved in the day to day, perhaps not day to day, but in the entirety, I'm sure.
So I will always be very proud to be a co-founder of Two Circles.
Exactly.
I'm not involved in the day-to-day anymore of the business, but I'm still a shareholder and a good friend of the business. And so, for example, next week there's a big 10th anniversary celebration. So I'll be down there with the team for our celebration, playing rhythm guitar in the band, Two Circles house band. But I'm not involved in the day-to-day anymore.
Okay. So obviously, Matt, because of the pandemic, things have changed drastically in the sports industry, within the sports industry. And obviously, we are still in the phase. COVID is not over. So, and from your experience, because you work across different portfolios, for different organizations, do you think COVID has had a long-lasting impact, and which is why the dynamics of sponsorships and commercials have evolved because of it?
Yes, there's a well-used, almost a cliche in England now in the sports industry that says that actually the pandemic has just sped up things that were happening in the industry anyway. and largely I subscribe to that. So I do a lot of work now with chief executives of sports businesses around the world, and a lot of them say for the first time in the last 12 months, they've had to think about their costs. They've had to think about their balance sheet and their finances in a more intelligent way, because traditionally in the West at least, revenues for clubs and teams and leagues were growing steadily, and that's because broadcast rights were growing steadily, and a lot of those weren't controlled by the teams themselves. You know, the broadcast rights might have been controlled by the league, for example, and all of a sudden, without any games on pitches and games on fields, broadcast checks aren't as big as they were. You know, they also have had less ability to fill stadia. And so as a result, they've had to say, well, how much cash do I have in my organization? How do I manage my costs when the revenues aren't flowing in? And if we look at the way in which broadcast and sponsorship revenues are changing now, after that short, sharp shock, they're not going to come back in the same way as pre-pandemic. So broadcast rights are probably about as high in many Western markets as they will go. And of course, on the back of the pandemic, you and I, none of us have as much money in our pocket to spend on tickets and spend on brands that sponsor events and things as well. And so leaders in sports around the world are having to become far smarter in the way in which they manage their finances. It's a lot less straightforward to run a sports business than it was 3 years ago.
Definitely. And would you reckon that digital is the way forward? You know, more digital initiatives by the clubs might help them drive more revenue, especially when it comes to fan engagement.
Certainly. And in fact, in a world where you can't sell tickets and maybe you don't have matches quite as often on television during the pandemic period, the importance of digital as a lever has increased markedly. If you look, for example, at the amount of digital inventory that the International Olympic Committee created this summer for their partners, in lieu of some of the hospitality they were able to offer around the games, you can see the revenue potential that comes from digital. And as clubs and players and leagues become more aware of their relationships directly with fans, they create a better data inventory and become smarter around the way they segment their audiences. That will absolutely be the future of, at the bare minimum, the sponsorship revenue line, where digital inventory can be sliced and diced in different ways. So rather than saying you can be our alcohol partner, or you can be our fast-moving consumer goods partner for a club, you'll be saying, we can sell you specific 16 to 34 affluent female inventory and upweight your campaigns in that way, just like a broadcaster would. And that's the way that sponsorship revenue is going to evolve and improve and increase going forward.
You mentioned about more brands getting involved, and perhaps, like everyone, even the brands are going through a cash crunch. Most of them, there might be categories which are doing well, the health and wellness category. It's booming, while the rest aren't. So which brand do you think has, sort of attracted your attention? Which brands have done things right during the pandemic? And, despite everything, have been able to gain something out of the situation?
From a sports sponsorship perspective, do you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's been real evolution in the last year, actually, in terms of how some brands are understanding how to connect global sports events and local sports events to immediate purchase. in a way that maybe they haven't been able to do before. So if you look at some of like the Airbnb and those kind of organizations, the way in which they've attached themselves to things like Euros football to drive uptake of inventory of rooms in and around events. It's done a really very good job of it. If you look at things like, we have a taxi company in the UK called Addison Lee that's worked in a really smart way with cricket in this country to drive uptake of new accounts to people for online taxi purchases by giving away free trips home from the cricket on Tuesday and Thursday night. And that's worked really well because what they've done is they've been able to match their customer set with the customer set of ticketed audience for the cricket in order to understand who specifically they're targeting. One of the other sectors that's worked extremely well in the UK recently is automotive. So in the same way, if you are if a club knows that it has certain number of people who live, say, within 2 miles of a car dealership for a certain car brand, they're the people for whom it upweights the marketing for that car brand, try to push people in to test drive the dealership for that car brand. If you might live 50 miles away from the car dealership, they don't upweight you in the campaign. And so any of those digitally orientated brands, I think, have done really well over the course of the last 12 months by thinking very differently about how they can make sponsorship work. Of course, those brands for whom the hospitality part of the proposition, they're very B2B focused, hospitality focused proposition, it's been less compelling in a world where there aren't hundreds of thousands of people in stadia. But I think the B2C, digitally orientated brands, B2C if you like, are the ones that have done very well through sponsorship in the last 12 months.
Yeah, and I think Kazoo is one of them. I mean, they've really sort of, amped up. Kazoo?
Yes, absolutely.
They're like,
exactly
they're going pretty big. And even the betting companies, they've sort of, gained so many clubs, like different betting companies with different clubs. So that has been one of the most interesting aspect which we saw this past year. And apart from that,
and just to say on Kazoo, I think what's interesting about them is, traditionally the sort of the on-shirt branding, competition name branding thing is quite powerful for those brands who are coming from nowhere, looking to generate brand awareness in the first instance. But what's so interesting about Kazoo is they've almost done two things at the same time. So they've created brand awareness and pushed it through the transaction very, very quickly. And that's something, if sport really understands its funnel, and the brand really understands its funnel and how it can take people not just for brand awareness, but right through to conversion, through good use of its database, that's really powerful. Something sport can do very well, I think.
Definitely. And I think a lot of brands, have come out to support women's sports as well, especially women's football and different teams, I think, which is sort of very refreshing. And if you've been following up recently, we've seen a lot of women also in leadership roles, their roles is increasing and everything. And you've been, a veteran in this industry, Matt. What is your take on inclusion and diversity within the sports industry? I'm not talking about just UK or Europe, but globally. Do you think it has improved, and it has improved for the betterment of the sports industry?
Yes. By which I mean, if I think about the number of conversations I've been in with senior executives, chief executives, who have put it in their top 3 priorities for their organizations in the last 18 months to 2 years compared to 4 or 5 years previously, markedly increased. And I think I make a distinction there between driving diversity in the game and driving diversity in terms of the people who work in the sport. So for the first of those, the single biggest success story, I would say, in the UK this summer has been the women's 100. and it's absolutely the women's competition that's driven that to be the success that it has been. And that's because the ECB and everyone who run that competition, from the first minute, there wasn't a single piece of marketing, a single piece of advertising that wasn't acutely aware of the need for diversity and representation of the female game and ethnic minorities or minorities in the UK demographic, front and centre of that proposition. Okay, so and they've done that for 2 years in exactly the same way that when the Olympic Games came to London 2012, the London 2012 organising committee never ran collateral without saying it was the organising committee for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So in terms of the external positioning of sport, it's changed massively over the last 10 years. And frankly, that I know some people at football teams who said to me in the last 12 months that they have as many approaches from brands to sponsor their female teams, including international football associations have as many approaches, if not more, people looking to sponsor their female teams as their male teams, which is massive progress. And particularly prescient as we are talking during the Paralympic Games, of course, where there's still a lot of work to do, but the Paralympic Games continues to improve in terms of its reach globally and the messages that come from that. In terms of diversity within the game and the sports industry, there's a lot of time, effort and energy that goes into trying to improve diversity at the senior level. If I look through the more junior ranks of Two Circles or other businesses I'm involved with, the effort that goes into creating diversity at a more junior level is massive. Whether that's blind CVs, whether that's taking qualifications, say, out of it and just asking specific responses to specific questions, whether that's working even harder in terms of relationships with recruiting organisations right the way across different walks of life to try and get as broader church of employees as possible. At a senior level, there is still work to do. I know the podcast that I run, we've worked really hard to try and have 50% female representation, 50% male this year. It's a senior CEO podcast, and we haven't quite managed it, but we're nearly there. And what it needs is for people to force it, actually. So I've had to say that for a couple of months at the end of the year, we're going to make sure this finishes at 50-50. We're going to make sure this is 50% female, 50% male, which means I'm just not going to interview any men. And we have to do things like that to force it. But it's getting easier and it's becoming more of a focus. We're just not quite there yet.
But I think it's at least we're moving in that direction, which is quite great. And I'm sure you'll achieve your 50-50 target. And apart from that, Matt, I know you've been writing a lot of books. And your recent book is All to Play For: How Sport Can Reboot Our Future. So tell us something about your latest book.
So yes, that's the book. It came out last month, and the intention of the book is to make a case for the important role that sport plays in our society. In the broadest sense, not only how professional sport is going to change and evolve in the next 10 years, and it will change and evolve much more in the next 10 years than the last 10, but also how we can use sport and exercise to shorten the queues at our doctor's surgeries, to help kids be happier in the way in which they grow up, to help them be more productive and learn more effectively. So I guess it's a bit of a blueprint for, I think, the emphasis and importance I think sport will have for all of us in the next 10 years, and tries to make a case for United Nations, political government, and indeed for all of us just to put him further towards the top of our agenda when we think about how we build our society in the next 10 years, because we have enough problems, don't we, around the world, and it's a really, I hope, solid case for how we can think differently about sport in the future.
Definitely, and I think it's something which, there's great intention behind this, what you're talking about. And especially if I were to talk about, where I am from, I live in a state, it's called Uttar Pradesh in India. And the population of the state is 24 crores people. Like we're talking about, that's like more than UK's population put all together. And obviously the scope, we have some amazing talented kids. We've just Olympics has just got over, and few of our players have won medals. So at some point, even I am planning to focus on getting more of grassroots players involved in sports. So obviously I'm going to be starting something soon, and I'll keep you posted. And I think you should definitely come to India and explore, because I think what currently India lacks is a bridge between UK and India, and we can bridge that gap. And I met British High Commissioner Alex, because I'm a British Council scholar as well. That's how I went to the UK and studied there. So they have this entire trade body which heads UK businesses. We're trying to look at India, facilitate everything, whatever is required. So maybe you should definitely check that out, because with your experience, we could really use people like you, and then you spoke about UN and getting UNHCR involved, and they support such amazing programs, and especially say in a country like ours, where there is abundance of talent, but we don't have necessarily a good blueprint to how to help tap that potential. And
if there's anything I can do to help, I'd be happy to have some conversations or come out. The only thing with coming out to India would be my kids wouldn't let me go without them, because they're enormous cricket fans. So they would love. I'll bring them out and get them out to the game. Like, it's on our bucket list for our family to take to a game in India. It'd be amazing.
Yes, please do. I mean, we'll be happy to host you. We just hosted a cricket match here where I stay, very close to, in fact, just 100 meters from here where I live. So there's this huge stadium where India played. I think played England. So yeah. So you are always welcome. And Matt, I work with not just the play-offs, with several organizations. I don't know if you know about I Work in Sport as well.
Yeah, not well, but I know of them. Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, they obviously I'm going to put your interview out on my platform, but they also have a bigger platform. Mm-hmm. So if you would like to go on that show and promote your book, because I think it's a great book with great intention. Yeah. So I would really like, and I'm sure you already are a podcaster with Sports Pro. So apart from that, I don't know if you're in touch with The Drum. My friend, you know about The Drum.
Yes, I've not done much with them actually, because the writer I used to know who worked there left. So listen, if you want to have a conversation about any of those and do another interview or whatever, just shout. I'm happy to help.
Definitely. I'll put in a word to John. He's a Scottish guy, but a very cool guy. Great. And he covers all the sports marketing. And I think
that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime.